It's the most wonderful time of the year. That's right, we're doing a top 10 of 2020. I don't really think I need to say that 2020 might not have been the best year to start off a new decade. I know a lot of these top 10s are going to have kind of like their title cards as being like a giant dumpster fire, and I was honestly considering doing that, but I'm a harbor of joy, of happiness, of all good feelings. So the one thing in this whole holiday season that really got me happy was Snow Cone from Noel. My girlfriend and I watched it over the holiday season, and that little dude just gave me joy. So all of my cutscenes are going to be of little Snow Cone because I just need it. So this is our top 10. These are the albums that I have enjoyed the most all over 2020, and it's one of my favorite videos to make. Each album that I listen to, basically starting in a new year, I wonder, where is it going to place, or is it going to place on my top 10? And I gotta be honest, the first, 5-6 months of this year, I didn't have a single album that I would have considered to be in my top 10. Nothing really wowed me, and I don't think it was just because of the lethargic blah that we've had over the whole year. It was just like the first half of this year really didn't have too many great albums. Now, there have been a couple of albums from that first little bit that have grown on me for sure, but they just didn't really connect with me. Before I get into my top 10, just a couple ground rules, as I always figure they're implicitly implied, but they're not. So I haven't listened to every single album that came out this year. Nobody has. There's way too much music out here. So this is just the music that I've been exposed to. If there's an album that didn't make the cut that you think was brilliant and fantastic and a masterpiece, probably didn't hear it. So let me know about those albums by commenting down below. The first couple of weeks of January is my favorite because I get to listen to all the music that I missed out on within that year. Also, this is my own personal take. I'm not saying that these are the most critically acclaimed albums. I'm not saying that these are the absolute best albums. These are just the albums that I found myself really digging and enjoying the most over 2020. And I'll explain a little bit more when we get into the specifics. Let's get into it. Let's talk about my top 10 albums of 2020, starting off with number 10. Human Nature by Nightwish. Now, I'm not a big fan of like that gothic metal that Nightwish is really known for. I would normally turn probably towards Camelot first rather than Nightwish, but man, Nightwish came on the scene with something powerful. I love this album. I kept coming back to it. I love how powerful it is with songs like Pan, but I also love the second side where it's much more of a soundtrack of nature, and I really love that concept that we have with Human being like the first disc of all these traditional power gothic symphonic metal, and then the second side is something that I would have heard from like a BBC nature documentary that I was listening to quite a bit, and I love listening to both sides, either together as a full album or separately. If I'm in the mood for some of that gothic power symphonic metal, I would listen to the first side. If I needed some more of those impressionistic soundscapes, I'd listen to the second album. Nightwish really pulled all the stops with this album, and I found myself loving every second of it. Number 9. Evermore by Taylor Swift. Now, this is one of the reasons why I wait until the very last week of December to put out my top 10s, because this one came at the beginning of December out of nowhere. There's no lead up, no build up, no advertising, nothing. This album was teased on the Thursday evening with Taylor basically being like, something big is coming on Friday. Friday, bam, a full realized album. This is coming off the coattails of her other album that she did the exact same thing for, of Folklore. I found myself loving this album even more. Even though it's still very young in my listening, I can't help but groove along to every single song. It's much more realized. It's much more mature. It's less of her wandering around and a reactionary expression, and much more of a thoughtful, philosophical expression of everything that's kind of going on. And I love how she took the styles that she had kind of laid down with Folklore and just built upon that. So I found myself returning to this album all throughout the season, and I really did love this album. And if you haven't, this might be the album to get you into Taylor Swift. So yeah. Number 8. Madness and Magic by Arabs in Aspect. This album just blew me away. What can I say? This came off the heels of a lot of symphonic retro prog that really didn't hit me as much, and even from really big bands that started off in that era, I still enjoyed, but there was a lot to shift through, and I really felt like Arabs in Aspect rose to the top with their Madness and Magic. I love the sounds, I love the expressions, I love how they're able to blend harder moments with very soft moments. The overall presentation of this album was very, very well done, and I just kept coming back to it. It might be my favorite retro prog outfit from this year. So if you haven't checked it out by now, definitely go and do so. It's a great time. Number 7. Virus by Wakeman. Man, Wakeman's knocking it out of the park again. They have yet to put out a bad album, and this album really kind of shows that. There are moments on this album that just shine so very bright. Like, there's no real moment on here that's as good as any of the moments on Vector, but I think as a 1-2 punch, this is a great finale. I love the Messiah complex, the big epic at the end of this. I love how brutal and technical this album is. True, there's not a whole lot of like harmonizations or memorable melodies, but in terms of technical prowess, this thing is a beast, and I really found myself digging every return that I had to this album. Yeah, it just goes to show Wakeman deserves to be one of the star performers in the modern progressive metal scene. And what they did with Virus was unprecedented. Number 6. Le Fantastique Envol de Dieterbaum by Lazuli. The French progressive rock band. Holy geez, this one came out pretty early in the year, and I just found myself loving every second of it. The fun, playful styles, the very optimistic sounds that we had on this. It wasn't very dark, but it was very entrancing. I found myself loving every time that I revisited it. I love the build-ups. I love the expressions. I love how really proggy it was, you know, with like the capital P. True, they didn't really do anything amazingly new or groundbreaking on it, but I mean, what they were able to lay down on this was one of the first albums after about 2 or 3 months that I kept thinking back to and being like, this is going to make my top 10. I don't know where it's going to place, but this was the first album that I would start judging other albums on to see, is it better? And most of them didn't make the cut. It wasn't until probably about June or July that the first album did in fact get a bit of a higher praise than Lazuli did. If you haven't listened to Lazuli yet, this is a perfect entry point for the band. So go and check it out if you haven't already. Number 5. The Red Planet by Rick Wakeman. This was the first album upon my first listen that I knew this was going to be on my top 10. This album blew me away. Much like 5 Suites for an Orchestra from Tony Banks back in 2017 or 18. I knew that was going to be on my top 10, and it made the number 1 album of the year. I thought this one was going to do that for this year. This album, again, it just blew me away, especially after so much meh from the grandfather of the keyboards of Rick Wakeman. Rick Wakeman is one of those guys that is nonstop, and so he's always churning out something new. There's a lot to shift through, and he's made some of my least favorite musical compositions, but the fact that he keeps churning out new stuff, even a broken clock is right twice a day, and this one is so friggin' right. It's a throwback to that prog stuff that we had from Six Wives, Journey to the Center of the Earth, and King Arthur. Bleeding through. I friggin' love this album, and I kept coming back to it just to get wrapped up in that really great keyboard, instrumental prog stuff. It was just a really nice hug. It was a really, really nice hug from an old grandfather that's still a little bit on the grouchy side, but it also shows that he still has some gas in the tank. Number 4. The All Is One by Motorcycle. Talk about an album that blew me away. Holy jeez. Now, the only reason why this guy isn't higher up on the list, because this album just, again, completely blew me away. And again, Motorcycle is one of those bands that just continuously creates and continuously surprises me with their albums. Their past handful have been hit and miss, if I'm being perfectly honest. The Crucible, released a couple of years ago, I think it was last year, really surprised me, but the last couple of them just didn't quite do it for me. There was always one or two tracks that really bled brilliance, but other than those like one or two moments, the rest of the album was just kind of bland. This was one of the few albums that, from start to finish, is just brilliant. The Knox suite, that's like right smack dab in the middle of this album. Holy jeez, the build-ups, the grand monolithic monstrosity that this guy creates. It's a testament of patience and payoff. I love this. I love just sitting down and letting those sounds wash over me. It's reminding me of some of the things from the Death Defying Unicorn, from the Jazza Jazz, from even Heavy Metal Fruit, where it's just this massive buildup of energy that's then just released. And one of the things that I kind of wonder about is the makeup of this album, because we have 20 minutes worth of kind of more traditional rock prog at the beginning, then this 40 minutes massive thing, and then another 20 minutes to kind of round it all off. And so it makes almost like a sandwich worth of music. And in some respects, I really like this expression, but on the other respects, it's kind of an odd pill to swallow. Anyway, I still found myself loving this album. I still found myself really digging into it and letting myself just be taken away by the music. Fantastic expression of music, and one that I know I'm going to be returning to in the years to come. Number 3. Through Shaded Woods by Lunatic Soul. Again, another album that just blew me away. This album was the perfect expression for 2020 for me. It was rustic. It was raw. It was very intimate, and I needed that. There wasn't a whole lot of electronical sounds, but when there were, it was used in just the right dash to create such a great spice to an overall great presentation. The 2 massive tracks on this just continuously blow me away. And honestly, this isn't a very long album, but it is chock full of just amazing music. I kept finding myself drawn back to it, and it's like it was begging me to re-listen to it. I kept hearing it whisper my name whenever I was listening to other musics. So yeah, Through Shaded Woods from Lunatic Soul is probably the best thing that Martin Duda, and I keep mispronouncing his first name, I apologize full-heartedly, but it's probably the best work that he's put out outside of Riverside, and probably the best work he's put out since ADHD. I loved it. I really, really did. It's a full-on masterpiece. Number 2. All Thoughts Fly by Anna von Hauswolf. Another album that blew me away. I love how minimalistic this album is. Like, it reminded me of, say, Philip Glass meets Zimmer. What's his first name? Hans Zimmer, I think it is. Both massive cinematic masterworks within creating these different soundscapes. And it's basically just her and an old-fashioned organ. And the amount of sound she's able to capture on this, it's so very human. It's so very impressionistic. It's like a brilliant oil on water mosaic. And the more I look at it, the more I get out of it. Like, I'm seeing myself, I'm seeing the human expression. It's probably the most perfect album for 2020 in being this just outpour of expression. And I couldn't help but just love the sounds that I was getting on this. Like, this is one of the main reasons why I love progressive rock, is because they throw out the conventional means of music. and they really hunkered down in this new style, these areas that normally wouldn't be played in, and it's done in such a masterful work. I could definitely tell Anna is playing in this sandbox, and she's just able to play. And I love that. I loved every single note that's on this album. I think it's a perfect album, and I couldn't help but just love every moment of it. But there's one album that came above them all. So before I get into my number one, I'm going to rapid fire my honorable mentions. I've got another 10 album. I'm not going to talk too much about them. I'm just going to kind of rapid fire because I know a lot of people are going to be like, well, where's this album? Where's that album? And honestly, I'm going to talk a lot more about those albums in my surprises and disappointments. These are albums that either surprised me but didn't really make the top 10, or those albums that didn't connect with me and I was very disappointed about them. So a lot of those albums are going to be covered in that one. I just wanted to rapid fire a few because I know people are going to be wondering where those fit. So number 20 is Gunfly, Alone Together. Loved it. Number 19 is John Petrucci's Terminal Velocity. Number 18 is Mariana Semkina's Sleepwalking. Number 17 was Hibernal's Relic. Number 16 was Palimpsest by Protest the Hero. 15 was Islands from the Flower Kings. 14 was Gazpacho's Firebringer. 13 was Birds of Passage by Carfagan. Number 12 was Pure Reason Revolution with Yerpina. And number 11 was Magenta's Masters of Illusion. So, coming into all that rapid fire pace, let's get into my number one album for 2020. Let's do it. Number one.
Make your own way up to the sky. Jumping on your rocket, raise your fist up. Look all the bad men in the eye. We're burning down the interstellar list.
Flower Torania by Zio. This album. Now, I will be one of the first to admit that critically and objectively, there were a lot of better albums that came out. I don't even know if this would have made my top 5 if we were talking about a kind of an objective musical expression. But honestly, there was something about this album that just kept bringing me back. And it was my number one album played this year. I just kept going back to it. It had everything that I loved about progressive rock. From the drummer of, was it Canatonia or Kanataka? Kanataka. And he brought a number of his friends from that outfit over. And I find when a drummer is kind of the visionary, you get such amazing music. The music itself is all over the map, but not in a bad way, in a very holistic way. I love how this album is able to hunker down and essentially play some really meaty, massive metal, while also balancing these very heartfelt ballads. You have poppy expressions and almost singles, while there's this overarching space opera that's going on. And that final 2 tracks off this album still make me weep. Like, I kept coming back to these 2 tracks again and again and again. I don't know, it filled me with such joy and such brilliance that I couldn't help but just let it all wash over me. I can't recommend this album more. It really did save me in a lot of different ways this year. Go out and check it out. It might not necessarily be your favorite one, because I can tell a lot of people will be like, it's fine. But I don't know, for me, there was such a brilliance about it that I didn't feel any other time this year. So there you go. There are my top 10, I guess top 20, because I rapid fire in my honorable mentions of 2020. What is your list? What does your top 10 look like? Which ones do you agree with me on? Which ones do you disagree on? Let me know all of that by commenting down below. Also, if you haven't already, check out my podcast. I'm uploading once every other week now, starting in the new year. It's Quid Prog Quo. It's on all streaming services, I think, for podcasts. Having a blast with that. It's helping me keep a level head. And if you haven't already, check out my Patreon. If you love what I do and you want to support me, that's the best way to do so. I've left both of those links down below for you to follow. And that's about it. I've got one more video for this week, which is the surprises and disappointments. I'm hoping to get that out in the middle of the week. But yeah, yeah, take care of yourselves. Let's hope that 2021 is a little bit kinder to everybody, and just stay safe out there. That's what I gotta leave you with. Stay safe, and hopefully we'll see you all next year. All right. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.